Imagine being a young child, thirsty on a long flight, and gathering the courage to ask for a simple glass of water. Now imagine being shouted at, humiliated, and treated as if your request was a crime. All because of the color of your skin. This is not just a story about a boy asking for water. It's about power, pride, and prejudice colliding at 35,000 feet in the air. And what happened next would change the fate of that airline. Forever. Stay with me until the end, because this story will leave you shocked, angry, but also inspired. The story begins on a quiet afternoon. A commercial flight was cruising smoothly across the skies, passengers settling in with their meals. Some watching movies, others trying to rest. Among them sat a young black boy, no older than 10. He was traveling alone, wearing a small backpack, sitting quietly in his economy seat. He wasn't loud, he wasn't disruptive, but as time passed, his throat grew dry. He needed something as simple as water. With childlike innocence, he pressed the service button. He waited, smiling shyly when the flight attendant finally approached. But instead of kindness, what greeted him was hostility. The attendant, a middle-aged woman with a sharp tone, looked annoyed. Before the boy could even finish asking for water, she raised her voice. Loud enough for passengers nearby to hear, she scolded him. "Don't press this button unless it's important. Sit back and wait. You don't get to demand things whenever you want." The boy's smile faded. His face flushed with embarrassment as passengers turned to stare. His simple request had turned into a public humiliation. For most children, this would have been the end. He would have stayed quiet, swallowed his thirst, and held back tears. But this boy's story was far from over. Because what no one, especially the flight attendant, realized was that his father wasn't just any man. His father was the very owner of the airline they were flying on. And the events about to unfold would change everything. The flight continued, but the atmosphere around the boy grew heavier. He sank deeper into his seat, feeling the weight of judgment from strangers who whispered about what just happened. Some passengers felt sympathy, but most stayed silent, afraid of causing trouble. The flight attendant walked away confidently, certain she had put the boy in his place. But humiliation doesn't sit quietly in a child's heart. Minutes later, thirst overtook his fear. He quietly got up from his seat and walked toward the back of the plane, hoping to get water himself. Maybe, he thought, if he didn't press the button and simply asked politely at the galley, things would be different. But when he reached the back, the same attendant blocked his way. She snapped, "I told you already, sit down. You don't just help yourself here. You need to learn how things work." This time, her voice was harsher, louder. Passengers turned again, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others pretending not to notice. The boy lowered his eyes. His lips were dry, his hands trembling. He wasn't misbehaving, he wasn't being rude, he was just thirsty. Yet somehow, he was being treated like a criminal. A woman sitting nearby whispered to her husband, "Why is she being so cruel?" "He's just a kid," the husband replied quietly. "Because he's black. If it was any other child," she would have smiled and brought the water right away. The boy, though young, understood more than people gave him credit for. He felt the sting of racism. It wasn't about the water anymore. It was about dignity. So with trembling hands, he reached for his small phone. He didn't want to, but he had no choice. He dialed one number, his father's, and thousands of feet below, in a tall glass office overlooking the city, his father, the CEO and owner of the airline, picked up. The father's voice was calm at first. He asked his son what was wrong, and the boy, fighting back tears, explained everything. The button, the shouting, the humiliation, the second rejection at the galley. For a moment, there was silence. Then his father's tone changed, firm, controlled, dangerous. "Stay calm," he told his son, "and give the phone to the flight attendant." The boy hesitated but obeyed. He held out the phone. The flight attendant frowned, rolling her eyes, clearly annoyed. But when she reluctantly placed the phone to her ear, her expression froze. Passengers watched in confusion as her confident posture crumbled. Her face drained of color, her hands shook. The commanding voice of the CEO cut through her arrogance. Like a knife, he didn't yell. He didn't need to. His words carried the weight of authority. The authority of the man who signed her paycheck, who controlled the airline itself. Within seconds, she stammered an apology into the phone, her earlier dominance vanishing into fear. Passengers watched as the once proud attendant now struggled to breathe, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. The boy's father had made himself clear. This would not go unpunished. The incident had been witnessed by too many people, and by the time this flight landed, her career in aviation would be over. When the plane finally landed, everything had changed. The boy's father was already waiting at the airport with a team of senior executives. The flight attendant was escorted off the aircraft, her head hanging low, passengers whispering as they passed. She had started the flight feeling powerful, believing she could humiliate a child without consequence. But she had forgotten one thing. True power doesn't come from cruelty. It comes from integrity, compassion, and justice. The young boy finally got his glass of water, but more than that, he received something greater. The knowledge that his dignity mattered, that his voice could not be silenced, and that his father would always protect him. Those who had stayed silent now felt guilty. Some approached the boy and apologized, saying they should have spoken up sooner. One woman admitted with tears in her eyes, "You reminded me that staying silent in the face of injustice makes us part of the problem." This story isn't just about water on a flight. It's about the thirst for justice, the hunger for equality, and the responsibility each of us has to stand against racism, no matter where it happens, in the streets, in schools, or even 35,000 feet in the air. Ask you, watching right now, if you had been on that plane, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have stood up for that boy? Because racism doesn't end with one powerful CEO. It ends when ordinary people, like you and me, refuse to let it continue. Believe every child deserves dignity, respect, and equality. Let your voice be heard. Share this story. Comment below with "Justice Matters." And never, ever stay silent in the face of racism.